All right, so today we're diving into this idea. Is telework like the next big thing, the next big internet revolution? To go Kartik's analysis, and he's making a pretty strong case that telework is like the natural evolution of how the internet changes things.
Yeah, and it's really interesting how he frames it.
Yeah.
He doesn't just see it as like, oh, this is convenient. It's more like, this is what the internet has always been doing,
Yeah.
like breaking down those barriers and changing how we do everything.
Right, like it's not just a fad,
Yeah,
like the next logical step.
exactly. And he makes these really interesting comparisons to other big shifts we've seen because of the internet.
Okay, yeah, let's get into those.
Okay.
So we've got free international calls,
hmm
e-commerce, like the explosion of online shopping, and then how streaming video has just taken over.
Right.
It seems like he's saying telework is kind of facing the same pushback.
Absolutely. Like he even uses the phrase stuck in the old ways
Yeah.
to describe the people who are resisting this whole telework thing.
Yeah. And he kind of calls out those arguments against remote work that you don't hear as much anymore.
hmm
Like the whole, we need those water cooler conversations.
Right. And he digs into why those arguments might be losing their power now.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, he points out that like the value we put on those face-to-face interactions, sometimes it just doesn't match up with all the hassle of commuting.
Yeah.
The time, the money, and even like the actual risks of going back and forth to an office every day.
Oh, yeah, the risks.
Yeah. He brings those up too.
Yeah, it makes you think about the trade-offs, for sure.
He really does.
Like how many of those crucial water cooler moments are actually happening compared to like the hundreds of commutes we do in a year.
Exactly.
And then he doesn't just stop there.
Nah.
He talks about the actual dangers of commuting, accidents, traffic jams, even crime on public transportation.
Right. Like he's not sugarcoating it.
No, he's not. But for him, it's not just about the logistics.
Right.
He's arguing that this whole office-centric mindset, it's like a deeper resistance to change.
Oh, absolutely.
He even compares it to how people reacted to the telephone, the automobile, even the internet itself.
Yeah, it's like we've seen this pattern before with every new technology.
Yeah, like history repeating itself.
Exactly, and I think that's one of his most compelling points.
Yeah.
He's suggesting that a lot of the opposition to telework, it might not actually be about telework itself,
Right.
but about this outdated way of thinking.
So it's not that telework is bad.
It's that change can be scary.
It's that we're scared of change.
Exactly, but it's worth thinking about, right?
Okay.
Are there valid concerns about telework beyond just this fear of change?
Yeah, are there downsides that he might be missing?
That's a good question.
Because he does address those common arguments against telework.
Right, like mentorship, social interaction, even harm to local businesses.
Yeah. And he pushes back pretty hard, saying those worries are often overblown.
Yeah, he doesn't just dismiss them, though.
Oh, really?
He actually engages with them
Oh, okay.
and offers these alternative perspectives.
Like what?
Well, for example, he says telework could actually lead to better mentorship.
Oh, how so?
Because if you're not seeing your mentor every day, those face-to-face interactions become more intentional,
Yeah,
more valuable.
I can see that.
And then with social interaction,
Yeah.
he argues that the flexibility of telework could allow for more social time.
Really? More?
Yeah, not less.
With family and in your community.
Exactly.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, he even brings up the hashtag #MeToo movement
Oh, okay.
and suggests that telework could potentially reduce harassment in the workplace.
Okay, that's a bold claim.
It is.
Yeah.
But it does raise some questions about how technology can change things like power and safety at work.
So we've got Kartik laying out this really strong case for telework as this natural evolution of the internet.
Yeah, he really is.
But I'm curious, is there anything on the other side of this?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? Are there any downsides he might be glossing over?
That's the big question, isn't it? And a really important one.
Yeah.
Because while Kartik makes a compelling case, I think it's crucial to look at the whole picture before we jump to any conclusion.
Yeah, we need the good and the bad.
Absolutely. And there's one really interesting wrinkle in all of this that Kartik tackles head on.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
And it involves someone who is all about disrupting things with technology, but who is actually opposed to telework.
Oh, really? Who is it?
Elon Musk. Welcome back. So we've been digging into this idea of telework, as the natural next step for the internet, like where it's all heading.
It is a pretty bold idea.
Right. And we talked about those historical parallels, like how people resisted the telephone and the car, all that.
Yeah, like those who are against telework now or maybe just scared of change.
Exactly. And Kartik seems to think they're on the wrong side of history, but what if he's right?
Yeah.
Like what happens to the rest of us if telework really takes over?
Yeah, let's zoom out a bit and look at the bigger picture. Is Kartik like all sunshine and roses about this? Or does he see any potential downsides?
Well, he does acknowledge there could be some bumps in the road, along the way. But overall, he's pretty optimistic about the impact of widespread telework. Like, he thinks it could really level the playing field, economically and socially, empower employees, open up all sorts of new opportunities, and maybe even lead to a healthier work-life balance for a lot of people.
So how does he see telework empowering employees? Like, what's the mechanism there?
One of the most interesting things he brings up is how it could shift the balance of power,
Right.
give employees more leverage.
Okay.
Like, take job hunting, for example, in the past. You might have had to use a vacation day just to go on an interview.
Oh, yeah, totally.
And that puts so much pressure on people. But with telework, you could potentially interview for several jobs, discreetly from home
Yeah.
without jumping through all those hoops.
Right. You've got more flexibility.
Exactly. And you're in a stronger position.
Yeah. It's almost like taking away some of that gatekeeping power that
Yeah.
employers used to have.
Yeah, leveling the playing field a bit. But it's not just about getting hired.
Right.
Kartik also talks about how telework could open up entirely new opportunities for people who maybe haven't had a fair shot in the traditional work world.
Okay. Like, who's he thinking of?
He talks about older workers, for instance, who might have trouble with commuting.
Yeah, because of age
Right, and they could stay in the workforce longer.
and keep contributing.
Exactly, sharing all that valuable experience. And then on the flip side, he points out how telework could be great for younger people, even teenagers who can't work traditional hours or commute long distances.
Yeah, it's like expanding the workforce, right?
Absolutely, allowing people to participate in ways that just weren't possible before.
So he's picturing this more inclusive and flexible work environment.
Yeah, I think that's the big picture.
That's pretty cool. But what about the social side of things? I mean, there's been a lot of talk about how telework could lead to social isolation, less interaction with colleagues and people in their communities.
It's a common concern, and Kartik actually addresses it.
Okay, what does he say?
He argues that telework could actually lead to more social interaction.
Wait, more?
Yeah, not less. His reasoning is that by freeing up all that time and energy we spend commuting, people would have more capacity for socializing, both with family and friends and within their communities.
So instead of being stuck in traffic,
You're having dinner with your family.
yeah, we're meeting up with friends.
Right, or volunteering in your community. He even suggests that dating might become easier for single people, without the exhaustion of a long commute hanging over them.
That's a really interesting take on it. It kind of flips the whole isolation argument on its head.
I thought so too. But what about the impact on local businesses, especially those that rely on office workers? There's been some concern about restaurants and shops near business districts struggling as fewer people go into the office every day.
Yeah, that's a valid concern.
Kartik acknowledges the potential economic impact, but he also sees new opportunities emerging.
Okay, like what?
Well, for one thing, he points out that the demand for home office supplies internet services, even home renovations, could increase.
That makes sense.
Right. So it's a shift in the economic landscape for sure,
Yeah.
but not necessarily a complete loss.
So it's not all doom and gloom for local businesses.
Right. It's about adapting and maybe even creating new markets.
Okay, this brings up another question. What role does Kartik see government playing in all of this? Should they be encouraging telework or regulating it?
He doesn't go into specific policies,
Okay.
but he's definitely against what he calls anti-telework measures.
Like what?
Well, he criticizes things like a tax on people who work from home.
Oh, wow.
He argues that would stifle innovation and limit individual freedom. He seems to believe that the free market is the best way to drive this transition.
So he's basically saying hands off, let the market figure it out.
Pretty much, but is there a risk in that?
Hmm.
Could a totally unregulated shift to telework lead to unintended consequences?
Yeah, like what?
Well, maybe things like increased inequality or exploitation of workers who are suddenly outside of those traditional workplace protections.
Those are some serious questions.
And it's something that Kartik doesn't really address directly. He focuses on individual choice and market-driven solutions, believing that the benefits of telework will outweigh the risks if people are free to make their own decisions.
It does leave us with a lot to think about, like how can we make sure this transition to a new world of work is fair and equitable? What kind of safeguards might we need to prevent those potential downsides?
These are really important questions and ones that we need to keep asking as we move forward.
We've explored the historical parallels, the economic arguments, the social implications of telework, and now it's time to look even further down the road. In the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore Kartik's vision of a future where telework is the norm And we'll examine what that might mean for our lives, our cities, our relationships.
It's a future full of possibilities and challenges. So join us as we take that final leap into the world of telework.
Okay, so we're back, and we've been talking all about Kartik's argument for telework. You know, how it's like the next big internet revolution.
Yeah, and all the potential upsides and downsides.
Right, like, are those water cooler conversations really that important?
Exactly. And now I think it's time to look ahead. Like, what does Kartik think the future holds if telework really does become the norm?
Yeah, he kind of paints this picture of a world where commuting is this, like, ancient relic of the past.
Yeah, like something our parents used to do.
And we all have way more control over our time and how we live our lives.
But it's a bit scary too, right?
Totally. Like, what happens to everything else if work isn't tied to a specific place anymore?
Yeah, what happens to cities, communities, relationships? Like, how does all that work?
Big questions.
Big questions. And Kartik doesn't have all the answers.
Of course not.
But he does throw out some really interesting ideas.
Okay, like what?
Well, for one thing, he thinks cities might actually become less congested.
Oh, really?
Well,
Less congested.
Yeah, because if people aren't forced to live within commuting distance of their jobs,
Right.
those super crowded downtown areas could start to spread out.
So we might see people moving back to rural areas or smaller towns.
Exactly, seeking out more affordable, more spacious living.
So instead of these huge office buildings, we might have these like vibrant residential communities with people working from home or maybe local co-working spaces.
Yeah, it's a pretty radical shift, right? Like, what even is going to work if work can happen anywhere?
And it's not just about real estate either, right?
No, not at all. Kartik points out that traditional office culture, all those rituals and expectations,
Yeah.
they might just fade away, and companies would have to find completely new ways to build teams and encourage collaboration when everyone's remote.
Yeah, like virtual team building activities, online social events.
Maybe even more emphasis on communicating asynchronously, where everyone doesn't have to be online at the same time.
It's crazy to think about how much our social interactions could change in a world dominated by telework.
Right. Will we just become even more reliant on technology to connect, or will it push us to find deeper, more meaningful ways to build relationships in our communities?
It's like a paradox.
It really is. And Kartik brings up another interesting point about education and training.
Oh, yeah. What about that?
Well, if those traditional apprenticeships and internships become harder to do,
Right, because everyone's remote.
how do young people get the experience they need to start their careers?
That's the point.
Could we see a future where virtual mentorships and online training programs become the norm?
That makes sense, especially for fields that are really hands-on,
Yeah.
where you need that in-person experience.
Exactly.
It's like this shift to telework could force us to completely rethink how we educate and prepare the next generation for the workforce.
Huge implications.
Huge. And then there's the impact on families.
Yeah, Kartik talks about the potential for more family time.
Right, which is great.
But
Yeah.
there are always two sides to every coin.
Yeah, like how do families handle that work-life balance when the lines between home and office get all blurry?
Exactly. And do we need new rules, new expectations to make sure telework doesn't turn into this always-on culture where everyone's burning out?
It feels like Kartik is really challenging us. Like he's saying, hey, the future's coming ready or not.
And we have to figure out how to make it work.
He's laid out this compelling case for telework as the natural next step for the internet.
Yeah, he really has.
But he's not naive about the challenges.
Absolutely. He knows there will be amazing opportunities
Mhm.
and some serious hurdles along the way.
So what's the takeaway here? What do we do with all of this?
I think the big message is that we're not just passive observers in all of this.
Sure.
We're active participants. We're shaping this future with the choices we make every day.
So as we navigate this changing world of work, we have a voice. We have a choice.
Ask yourself, how can I embrace the benefits of telework while being aware of the potential downsides?
Yeah, how can we create a future where technology empowers us instead of controlling us?
That's the challenge, and I think that's a great place to leave it.
I agree. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of telework. It's been a fascinating conversation, and it's definitely a topic that's going to keep evolving. So keep those questions coming and keep those conversations going. We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.